Mr. President, I want to thank the author for taking time during the break to speak with me and give me some of his heart, which I accept. And as I stated to him, this bill and what it talks about with Martin Luther King is many things, and one of those is discrimination. And sometimes that comes in the form of just avoiding certain groups, whether on purpose or not. And while I think most everything in this bill is important to be taught, and I agree with the author on that, as I told him, I also am disappointed that I've done a lot of work in this area, and I was not briefed, gotten an opportunity to give input or anything like that, nor any other African-American legislature. I'm in the Oklahoma Legislative Black Caucus, and I don't know any of them that got input on this bill. And so while many aspects of this bill are very good, I think that when we cherry pick and just decide that all of the history that led to Martin Luther King's acts and many other acts related to civil rights and other rights, it's important for us to teach. And I don't know why we feel like we need to cherry pick and just say we want to make a law as though we're not open to teach all of the history. And so I'm disappointed that I didn't have input. I'm disappointed that this is so narrow. I don't think that things in the bill are bad things. But because it's so limited, for those reasons, I'm voting no.
Any further debate on House Bill 1397? Will there be any further debate? Senator Young, you're recognized for debate on House Bill 1397.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me first say that I'm voting no on this bill, not because it's a bad piece of legislation. Matter of fact, it does some good in its intent. But when I've heard the discussion that has transpired about this particular piece of legislation, I am very troubled. Said it goes from 54 to 68. Well, in 1954, I was born. Said this has to do with Jim Crow states. In 54, I was born in Memphis, Tennessee. And in 68, on April the 4th, when this bill was, if you look on the last page, made it through committee, was April the 4th, the very day that Dr. King was assassinated on. I'm troubled by this. We want to take away all of the past, plant it into, because that's what happens when you have pieces of legislation like this. If you say this is what we will use for the study of black history, we'll start at the civil rights movement. There was so much more before the civil rights movement. If you want to talk about the civil rights movement, you have to go back to 1619. And then you have to travel all the way up until right after the Civil War, when the 13th Amendment, which gave freedom to slaves, the 14th Amendment, which said no discrimination, and the 14th Amendment, which said there would be, listen, the right for all people to vote. Dr. King was considered a criminal in his day. He was arrested. And if many of us would stop and read his letter from a Birmingham jail, we would see that he would not even vote for this bill. It is not a piece of legislation that does any good for the people who you're trying to do good for. I'm saddened that we want to truncate, we want to cut off. We have a history in this country. As I said earlier in a meeting earlier, we are living in a country that is built on stolen land, and the economic system of this country was built on the backs of stolen people. If we try to start at the civil rights movement in 1954 when I was born, obviously I lived through that. I was in Memphis when Dr. King was assassinated. If we try to start there, we lose and miss one of the greatest stories in the history of this nation. Look at how far the African American race have come. Look at what we have accomplished. Let's talk about where it started from. Let's don't start in the middle and act like there was nothing for us to overcome to get to where we are now. The fact that I'm standing and being able to speak right now speaks to the history of A.C. Hamlin, who was in the first legislative session of the state of Oklahoma. And the first bill he had to vote on was one that eliminated the possibilities of him to return to this body. But at least we have 2 African-American senators here now. At least we have representation in the House. But this piece of legislation would truncate, would try to isolate. And let me stop for a minute and say 1775 has a lot to do with what we're talking about right now. Because when that bill came through, I asked my good friend from Durant, why? And he said, we're worried about the welfare of our children. We don't want children leaving school feeling bad. I don't want anybody feeling bad either. There is a story to be told, and telling just a portion of that story is not going to be very helpful. I don't think Dr. King would vote for this bill, because it's not a bill that tells of the struggle, that tells of the battle, that tells of the things that are consistently and persistently still being done to hold back the progress that is quite possible. I hope that each of you would listen to someone who had to live through what you're voting on right now and agree with me that maybe we need to go back to the drawing board, let this die, and try again next year to do something that would be representative of the people who have fought through, overcome, and have done so much to make this country not only part of this country, but make this country part of what it is right now. Again, I'm asking that you would stand with me in this particular moment and vote against this piece of legislation as someone who lives through what you're trying to do here, and to realize that it's not meeting the mark. Thank you, Mr. President.
For more information, you can visit TulsaWorld.com.